Hello, this is the Dazzling One, and this week's discussion is on spiritual health. There's a lot of emphasis about keeping your body fit, not letting yourself go, eating the right things, and unfortunately, there's not enough of an emphasis on our spiritual health, specifically our soul, comprised of our minds, wills, and emotions. When you think about it for a minute, some of the biggest problems in society right now are mental health, emotional instability, and people losing their will, whether it be apathy or suicide and depression. When you think about it, we should be paying more attention to our soul. But in a society where, quote-unquote, religion and spirituality is the last thing on most mind, but making a quick buck, keeping up with the latest trend, competing and decorating yourself with accolades is all that matters, then who would care about your soul? Who would care about your spiritual health? But as a follower of Christ, it's essential that we take a look at our spiritual health. If we were stripped down to nothing but our soul, would our soul be robust and healthy, or would it be sick and dying? Would it be obese with all kinds of immoralities and sin? That's a tough question, isn't it? How mature would our soul be? Would it be like an infant, or would it be like a wise elderly individual? Many are dropping their faith and either becoming agnostic or are going towards other forms of spirituality, whether it be Eastern religions. And maybe it's because it actually does something for their spiritual health, even if it's not the right path. And some do it because they don't even believe in spirits. Now, I'm going to say this. I realize that I'm a bit fortunate compared to some that grow up in Western society. Both my parents ingrained in me that there was a spiritual world, that it wasn't just us. And I go to school and I hear that the likelihood of that is slim, that there's no physical evidence. It's funny because having a channel where I discuss the paranormal, the supernatural, quote-unquote pseudoscientific topics, I often get critics, be it atheists, agnostics, and other people who are non-Christians or people who aren't believers of any form of the Abrahamic religions, criticizing me for being ignorant, uneducated, only reading the Bible. And I have to laugh at it because I had to come to know Christ myself. It wasn't just some sitting in a Sunday school class in the Bible Belt and deciding it because my parents did it. Both of my parents weren't even Christian, you could say. Yes, my mother, she was a quote-unquote Christian. She grew up in church. Her father was a pastor. He died before she was 10 years old. And while she did serve Christ while she was in her youth, she went away from him and lived in the world and realized that she was broken without him and had to know him herself. My father, on the other hand, hasn't come yet to Christ, and I'm praying for him. But even though he wasn't a Christian, and he did have family that were Roman Catholics, being that was the popular religion of his small town in Mexico, he said despite living in pretty much third world impoverished conditions with no electricity, with barely anything to eat, they still knew there were spirits out there. They still knew there was a God, that there was a Satan. And it's not just the product of being uneducated. It's funny because I study the sciences, both a natural science and a social science, biology and sociology. And both have lots of arguments that people have used down through the ages to make religion seem like it's some type of tool of brainwashing. And if you look at a relationship with Christ as a religion and nothing more than a ritual by a 501c3 controlled church who's exempt by the state, who tells them what to preach, then it can be used as a form of control. But when you actually come to know Christ yourself, study the Word yourself, talk to God yourself, you'll realize that it is the truth. And I almost have to laugh at those who say they know the truth, yet deny the real truth of Christ. And the thing is, I came to this knowledge myself. I went through my own form of trials, and I learned that only one name did these spirits flee from. Only one name was able to get me through those hard times, and that was the name of Jesus or Yeshua. Without the Most High, it was like I had an empty void. I have to say that I've been pretty fortunate in life in the sense that I didn't really have to live impoverished. I got a lot of things that I wanted materially, but it was never the source of my happiness. I achieved certain things that some may say would fulfill you, but it wasn't the source of my happiness. The only thing that brought me joy, the only thing that brought me peace of mind was my relationship with Christ. For those of you who know my history, this may sound redundant. For those of you who don't, I graduated high school 5 years ago back in May of 2012. And I took a year off because I simply didn't know what I was going to do. During that year off, not only did I work on my first novel, but begin my second novel, but I also read the Word daily, prayed, and I spent time with Christ. That was the time I was at the most peace. I was the most content that I've ever been. A year after, I began college, and I began to notice that I would get anxious. I even began to experience mild depression. Part of it had to do with the curriculum and the major I had chosen to be biology pre-med, and feeling as if any B would murder my chances. But another part of it had to do with having to try to fit into the system of just get A's, just get A's, just get A's. And, I was doing everything the world told me to do, but I wasn't happy. But when I started reading the Word and getting back into it, that's where my happiness was. And like I told you, back in April of this year, I came to a point where I was just feeling completely down. My spiritual health was at an all-time low, and it had a lot to do with distancing myself from Christ, distancing myself from my spiritual health, neglecting my soul. When your soul suffers, your mind suffers. There is a huge anxiety and depression problem in this country, but anxiety surpassed depression around 2012 as the #1 mental illness. And interestingly enough, anxiety is a response to a threat in nature. What do you think so many people feel threatened by? Maybe it's this world that we live in. This world is bombarded with all kinds of fear-mongering and propaganda, but we're constantly under attack spiritually. Something that this channel often discusses is spiritual attacks, psychic attacks or astral attacks, sleep paralysis, nightmares, incubuses, succubuses, spirit husbands, spirit wives, marine spirits, astral rape. I've experienced these types of things, and what I found from it was sometimes I knew what was going on, sometimes I did not. And each time I experienced these encounters, especially if it had to be like a rape or some type of sexual dream, I woke up feeling guilty and condemned as if I had actually fornicated or been raped. Neither had happened, but yet it did to my soul. When you think about it, these spirits were trying to merge their energies with mine. And this is what they try to do to you if you've ever had this happen. And the reason they try to do it is when they do this, they're trying to create a soul tie. They're also trying to transfer their fears, their anxiety to you, trying to drain your energy in your sleep. And often when I'd get a word from the Most High or I'd spend time with them, they'd also try to do this as a method. There's a lot of Christians who condemn people for having these attacks, saying that they must have opened a door. And sometimes people do open doors, but sometimes they do it to you when you're on the right path to get you off that path, to make you feel as if you're powerless and that Satan has all the power when he does not, that he's already been defeated. And if we're not careful, we don't talk about it, then again, it's another form of neglecting your spiritual health. Our spiritual health matters, yet the world will tell you that the soul might not even exist, or if it does, it's the last thing you should worry about. Another way in which our soul is constantly under attack isn't just in our sleep, although the sleep is a great way in which Satan tries to attack us because we're unconscious and he tries to get us to agree to things and to feel certain ways when we wake up. We feel crummy. But also through what we watch and through what we're exposed to. As someone who studied quote-unquote conspiracy theories about news and entertainment, you'll often find it's full of propaganda, it's full of psychological operations, and the thing about it is this stuff can also attack our soul if not careful. Our soul can get fragmented from fear, from anger, from hatred. It tries to create emotions and invoke certain negative feelings within us. And this is bad for our soul, especially if that's all we're taking in all day, day in and day out. Same thing with music. Doesn't produce good fruit, or is full of nothing but lust and violence and negativity. And we're often fed this by the quote-unquote powers that be. And they do this because they know it's an attack on our soul. Yet the world tells us that our real concern is working till we die and making sure that we're good citizens. but our souls are under attack. At the end of the day, we can't take our success with us when we die. We can't take our money. We can't take our accomplishments or our friends. All we can take is our soul. That's all that is left. And that is why it's constantly under attack from these different forms of evil. And we must be careful what we consume, because I've consumed things I should not have, and it has come back to haunt me in my sleep, where I felt it alter my soul, and it's left me feeling negative emotions. So we must remove ourselves from those types of influences as well. That includes people. I've talked about psychic vampires and people that create negative feelings. And another way in which he can attack us is strongholds and negative thoughts in our soul. Again, our mind is a part of our soul. Yes, when psychologists study the brain, that is something tangible, something physical, something that deals with nerves and hormones. But our mind, that's something spiritual. That contains our will. And when our mind is sick, our soul is sick too much of the time. And he'll create strongholds if we're not careful. Negative thoughts that we should never ruminate on, but too many people do. One problem I had when I wasn't spending enough time with Christ, or even new to this, was I didn't have much discernment. And discernment is something you can pray for. And I used to think that the negative thoughts I had were just a part of me. That it wasn't external, it wasn't coming from Satan or demonic influences. But over time, as I began spending more time with God, I began to realize that I could hear his voice, but I also could discern whenever I was hearing Satan's voice suggesting things to me. When I realized that was not a part of me, I was able to rebuke it and to move past it and not take it personally or to heart. And that's another, we need to be in tune with our soul, with our spirit, and understand what is going on. And not completely neglect it and push it to the back burner either. Now, I'm not saying with all of this to neglect your life itself and to stop working and stop doing what you're supposed to do, because that obviously wouldn't be the right choice either. But just make sure that before you obsess over everything else and forget about your spiritual health, that you take a look at it and think about it. Because at the end of this day, all we have left is our soul. We really are just spirit beings in flesh bodies. For some, that may be impossible to understand. And I've come to realize that to even begin to know Christ, you have to be called. And not everybody has eyes to see, ears to hear. But for those of us who he's called, it's important that we don't neglect our spiritual health. I hope that you enjoyed this message and that you have a wonderful week. Take care and God bless.